Anybody that know him gonna tell you, all he did was smile.
So he was happy.
He was a happy person. He loved helping the elderly, loved feeding people,
Yes.
taking care of other people's children if he could, and a father of a 7-year-old daughter. So he was well loved.
Here we go.
Let's fix our step.
Let's fix our step.
Here we go.
A group of people have come here to Taylorsville to demand answers for what's happened to Rasheem Carter. He went missing over 6 months ago, and it was a month later that parts of his body were found in a field nearby to here. Now, the family and a lot of black people here in the community think that this was a murder, and that murder was racially motivated. There's also a lot of suspicion about the role of law enforcement here. So people are here to demand an outside investigation of this case and to demand answers for what happened to Rasheem Carter.
I want to thank everybody here today for standing with us in unity and solidarity. This has really been a struggle for our family, but we're going to do the best we can to fight to get the justice that we deserve to have.
That's right.
Rasheem Carter's case is complicated, and there's a lot we don't know. What we do know is that last September, Carter traveled to Taylorsville for a short-term contract job at a chemical plant. He was staying at a hotel about 30 minutes outside of town. On October 1st, Carter texted his mother, saying there was a truck full of white men following him and shouting racial slurs, and that he was scared. His mother told him to make an official report with the police department, which he did. He also asked the police for a ride back to his hotel because he felt unsafe. But the police refused, saying that it was outside of the jurisdiction. This is where the timeline gets fuzzy. It's unclear where Carter spent the night, but early the next morning, he returned to the police again to ask to borrow a phone charger. Police said they didn't have a charger that would work with his phone, but suggested he buy one at the Family Dollar. With his phone battery at 1%, he texted his mother his location, and she sent a friend to pick him up. But by the time they arrived, Carter was gone. The next day, October 2nd, the family went to Taylorsville PD and filed a missing persons report. Days went by without news, so they called the Sheriff's Department of Smith County, of which Taylorsville is a part, and asked if they had seen Rasheem Carter. The Sheriff's Department said no one had told them he was missing, and that this was the first they'd heard of it, 3 days after the initial report, and it seemed no one was looking for him. Another 3 days went by, and the police didn't have anything, so the family drove into town to look on their own. They went to one of the stores in the area that Carter had last texted from and asked if they had any surveillance footage. The employees handed the footage over. Then the family asked if they'd also given this same footage to the police. They were told that police had never even asked for it. Almost a month later, a property owner in Taylorsville alerted law enforcement that he'd found an image of someone on his deer cam that he didn't recognize. Taylorsville police took dogs to search the area, and then stated they'd found remains they believed were Carter's in a wooded area just outside of Taylorsville. Only a skull and some fragments of a vertebrae remained. Official documents from the case seemed to suggest that trauma to the bones indicated some sort of injury, but the cause of death was listed as undetermined. The report also indicated that animals may since have eaten some of the remains. Once the remains were located, Smith County Sheriff's Department almost immediately said in a Facebook post that they didn't suspect foul play. They would later backtrack on this, saying that they hadn't ruled it out. The family did suspect that this was a murder, and felt that law enforcement were not making an effort to find the person responsible. So, in February, the family organized a protest in Taylorsville to demand a more thorough investigation. The participants, who were mostly black, marched to Taylorsville Police Department, where they were taunted by a group of white men. One of the protesters wrote a message in chalk on the pavement saying that Rasheem Carter's life mattered. That same evening, Taylorsville Police Chief Gabe Horn posted a picture on Facebook of an officer power washing the message off the pavement with the caption, "Just a little cleanup," and a hand-waving emoji. All of this has added to community suspicions that officials don't actually care about Rasheem Carter, and this suspicion has spread. On May 11th, Benjamin Crump gave a press conference and used the word that was on everyone's minds.
That this was not of natural causes. This was a Mississippi lynching in 2022 of a young black man.
Which brings us up to today, 6 months later, a community on edge and no answers as to what really happened to Rasheem Carter. But Carter's case isn't the first time the topic of modern lynchings has come up in this part of Mississippi. Jill Colleen Jefferson is a civil rights attorney who does pro bono investigations into suspected lynchings. What kind of town is this here?
This is old school Mississippi right here. I grew up in Taylorsville. That has a deep history. It's a place where people are incredibly friendly, but also a place where, like in a lot of places in Mississippi, there's still deep-seated racism.
Tell me about the first case you really started working on.
The Willie Andrew Jones Jr. case, we solved this case. Willie, a 21-year-old black man, he was found hanging from a tree in his white girlfriend's front yard. The cops got there, and within 40 minutes of their being on the scene, they had told Willie's mother that it was suicide, that it was nothing else. They hadn't even talked to witnesses. They hadn't done any type of investigation. I started running our own investigation, going over phone records, getting surveillance footage, going to the crime scene, and there was just so many things that they missed.
Where is Willie Jones Jr.'s case now?
We won a civil case in 2021 and we won $11 million. Right now, the district attorney refuses to prosecute for murder. Part of the truth that people need to realize is that in so many of these tiny places in Mississippi, Jim Crow is actually still alive. The environment is still very much the same, that if you're black and you're there, that you're likely unsafe. People think we're further along than we actually are. The thing is, lynchings never stopped. Because they're not in the mainstream anymore, people assume that they're not happening, but they've never, ever, ever stopped.
In the Willie Jones Jr. case, authorities continue to maintain that the evidence points to a suicide and not a lynching. Mississippi has more lynchings historically than any other state in the U.S. Marion Allen is a historian who's been watching Rasheem Carter's case.
Is it here?
She works to establish memorials around Mississippi to commemorate different lynchings that have happened in the state.
Not too far away from here is where Rasheem Carter went missing.
Yes. This is an actual site that we know where people were hung. And this is known as the notorious hanging bridge of Shabuta, Mississippi.
How many people were hung from here?
First, it was 2 teenage boys who were hung for allegedly raping a young white girl, 2 men and 2 females who were also hung. The 2 ladies that were killed, they were pregnant.
Do you think lynchings are still happening today?
The lynchings of today are more high class. We use bullets and guns. So I can't hang you from a tree. Sometimes people are lynched. People with mysterious death that they just end up on the bank of a river. No one knows how did he or she get there. How did it happen? See, people don't like to talk about racist. We talk about race, but we don't talk about a person being a racist. Because that's like an ugly word. Oh, I'm not a racist. I have black friends.
Racism exists, but there's no racists.
That's right. There's no racists. That's right. When people show you who they are, as Maya Angelou say, believe them. They showed you who they are in that town. We're standing here. We're talking about 1900s. We're in 2023. Things are still happening. When will it all change?
There's a fear in Taylorsville that speaking too loudly about these things could get you targeted, especially after the first protest, when the Carter family's march set off white people yelling racial slurs at them, and angry posts online threatening to kill black people.
One more time!
But since then, the family's gotten more support, especially from people outside the area. The most recent protest was dominated by a controversial religious group that isn't even from Taylorsville. Almost all of these men are from out of town, some as far as New York or further. Just like the first protest, there were some white residents who seemed angry about the march and weren't shy about making that known.
There's a crackhead come down here, and for some reason something happened to him, and hell, nobody in town even knew who he was. And they want to blame injustice. They don't know what injustice is. They've been crying it for 4 generations. Y'all was working somewhere. Be different.
But unlike last time, nobody really messed with the protesters. Jill Jefferson says she understands why people in Taylorsville already don't trust the police. And she says the way police initially handled this case has probably felt like a confirmation of their worst fears.
There was a rush to judgment about what happened, that judgment being that nothing happened. They're still finding body parts. So obviously this crime scene, it hasn't even been cased properly. On both sides, there have been conclusions that have been made that are not supported yet. We don't yet know if this was a lynching. And that's just the truth. We have all of these events that are separate, but nobody's put them together. Nobody's connected the dots. We can call this a really suspicious case that really needs to be looked into more, but there is not enough evidence to call this a lynching.
Beyond all of that, there's the human element of this. It sounds like you understand why people would go to that conclusion.
I completely understand how people came to that conclusion. In Mississippi, there have been at least 8 modern-day lynchings since 2000, and there are probably dozens and dozens more. We just don't know these people's names. It was actually a white reporter who told me that they would just go check in sheriff's departments or police stations and say, hey, what you got today, or what happened? And the cops in this day and time would say, nothing but a nigger killing. And so that tells you how these cases are kind of treated like on a mass scale in this state.
Nothing but a nigger killing.
Yes. Black lives and white lives are treated differently in terms of the response by law enforcement in Mississippi. So I understand the assumptions, for sure.
Vice News has reached out to the Taylorsville Police Department for an interview. They declined. We were able to speak to Smith County Sheriff Joel Houston, who's taken over the case since Carter's remains were found. He says they're doing all they can to find answers for the Carter family.
When you first heard about this case, what was going through your mind?
We had a job to do, and that was locate him, so that's what we sought out to do.
Clearly there are people who feel like, hey, this isn't being handled right.
Well, it is being handled right. That's part of the world we live in today.
What do you mean by that?
It's easy to blame the police.
Do you think that's changed recently?
I think it's changed in the past 6 or 7 years, for sure.
Mm-hmm. There's some pretty serious accusations.
Mm-hmm.
Going all the way up to saying, hey, there's some kind of cover-up happening. Do you have any sense of why people would feel that way?
I don't. I really don't.
The sense that I've seen in the community is that people's lives are being disregarded, specifically because they are Black. And that if the victim was white, if the person who was missing was white, it would be different.
Was that a question? Or
statement, or?
I don't care what color the person is. We have a job to do and we're gonna do it. This is not a racist place, a racist county. And white, black, pink, or purple, we've got a job to do. They're trying to portray that, this is a bad county, this is where hate crimes take place, and that is not the case.
Have you seen the image of the Taylorsville Chief of Police power washing away the writings?
I have.
What did you think of that?
I really don't want to get into all that.
Why is that?
Can you cut the camera for a minute?
I can tell you why I'm asking.
Okay.
I can tell you why I'm asking. The community sees that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not you, but it is a man with a badge.
Right. Yeah, that picture, that was not for social media. This started before that picture ever took place.
You're from here, this is your community, this is the community you serve. How does it make you feel when somebody says, this is a lynching, there's a cover-up?
It puts out a false narrative, which brings up a lot of troubled history that's not anywhere accurate to what we're dealing with this case.
He buried beside his dad.
Oh, really? You gotta tell me about this goat thing. What's going on here?
The greatest of all time. He was just that.
That's him.
Really?
He was well known here in this community. People loved him. He didn't mind helping the elderly. He didn't mind helping people better themselves.
He told the mayor that he was gonna run against him.
He went to the mayor and said, I'm gonna run against you.
Yeah, he said, and I'm just waiting because I'm gonna run for mayor. I'm gonna be the mayor.
You proud of him?
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
I can see it.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I'm going to always love my son, and I'm going to push his legacy to the day I leave this world. And we're going to fight for justice, too. We're going to fight
We'll get some answers.
until we get some answers. Whatever it takes, we're going to do what we got to do until we get the answers we deserve.